The M1911A1 OU812, a true American icon. It was the first semi-automatic pistol to be adopted by the US Army. It's been featured in countless Hollywood films. It's the starting pistol for many Call of Duty Zombies maps. And so far, it's the only handgun to ever appear on the cover of AARP magazine. For well over 100 years, this firearm has somehow remained relevant, even while other weapons have come and gone. But what exactly is its origin? How did it get here? What makes it so mouth-watering? Are 1911 fans really part of a cult? Or could it be that this handgun is the total synergy of function and beauty, representing the peak of sidearm design? Yeah, right.
Light, easy to handle, effective, easily carried at the side. To get the maximum out of his gun, a man must learn to fire quickly and instinctively. With the handgun, practically a part of it, quickly and instinctively. Enough to seriously wound a man. Easily carried at the side. A man must learn to fire quickly and instinctively. A man armed with a handgun must have the same kind of advanced training with his weapon.
In the late 1800s, the United States government was in dire need of new weaponry which could be standardized for each branch of the military. The battlefield was changing, and the old, dusty muskets and revolvers just weren't cutting it, especially at a time when nations across the globe were scrambling to develop more efficient self-loading rifles and machine guns. So the Americans tested a bunch of imported and domestic sidearms, like the Luger, the Mauser C96, and the Colt M1900, whose long slide was designed to reach across the battlefield and cap the enemy at point-blank range.
Pow!
The M1900 made use of the short recoil design pioneered by American inventor John Moses Browning, John Moses of color. This design would eventually become the basis for nearly all modern pistols, but not before some serious issues were resolved. You see, the Colt performed terribly in testing, while the imports were more well received. So the Army ordered a bunch of the foreign guns, but soon they ran into another problem. The smaller cartridges fired from these weapons were ineffective against Filipino guerrillas, who had become much tougher than Harambe due to their heavy consumption of super male vitality.
I will eat your ass!
This prompted the Army to search for a new pistol chambered in the more robust .45 caliber cartridge. So Colt spent the next few years retooling and tweaking the design, submitting multiple variations over the course of multiple tests. By 1910, the Army had narrowed their options down to either Savage or Colt. According to legend, the final showdown saw Colt defeat the competition by surviving a 6,000-round torture test without a single hiccup.
Hey, I doubt it!
Yeah, I'm gonna press X to doubt on that one. As you can probably guess, the pistol was officially adopted in the year of our Lord 1911 and went on to serve in numerous conflicts throughout the 20th century, including both world wars, Korea, Vietnam, and probably a bunch of other operations the CIA doesn't want you to know about. As the age of excess approached, the time came for the 1911 to retire, and once again, the search began for a new service pistol. The US military, under President Reagan and Vice President George H.W. Bush, held a number of tests to determine which handgun would replace the 1911, eventually settling on the 9mm Beretta 92, or M9 as it came to be known. Based on this, one could argue that although George W. Bush did 9/11, his father, George H.W. Bush, didn't 1911. I'll see myself out. While the 1911 only sees limited use in the US Armed Forces today, it is still popular in other parts of the world, in the civilian gun market, in shooting competitions, and in retirement communities everywhere. A quick note before we go any further. The 1911 is not to be confused with another Browning firearm, the FN Model 1910, which was famously used in 1914 to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Shaniqua. I'm not even sure if the Bosnian assassins would have had access to a true 1911 if they desired one, but if they did, I bet Gavrilo Princip's meeting with the arms dealer went something like this.
Why don't you just make 10 louder?
These go to 11.
So what is it about the 1911 that makes it so beloved, even after all these years? Well, if we're talking function, some people like having a hammer instead of a striker. They like the durability of a steel frame. They enjoy fine-tuning the trigger to their exact preference. And they prefer to have a thumb safety and a beaver tail safety, which doubles as a grip strength trainer. I guess it's nice to have two different safeties, so you'll have a backup in case you accidentally lock one of them in your car. And as far as aesthetics, the 1911 is reminiscent of an era where all guns were bulky, manly machines, forged from wood, steel, whiskey, and chest hair, before petroleum-based guns took over and started leaching phthalates into our skin. But if your grandpa had been given the chance to carry an M4 and a Polymer 9 instead of an M1 and a 1911, I bet he would have done it. And he probably would have kicked some German ass instead of drowning while storming the beaches of Normandy. But don't just take my word for it. Let's hear what the 1911 fans have to say in their own words. I like the 1911 because it's older, and older guns are simpler than those newfangled Bluetooth crypto guns. If we're talking about the number of parts here, a 1911 has around 50 to 52, while a Glock has about 34, and a Smith & Wesson M&P has about 45. In fact, most modern polymer frame handguns have fewer parts than a 1911, so older isn't always better, unless you're talking about my girl Betty White. May she rest in peace. I like my 1911 because the 45 is a man-stopper. Sure, 45 is great if you can hit the guy, but what happens when you miss a few rounds or you didn't hit the vitals? That 7+1 capacity can run out pretty fast.
$7 million gets you 7 rounds.
I've only got 7.
If you want a 45, why not go for an FN, a SIG, a Glock, a Walther, or literally any other manufacturer whose handgun doesn't weigh as much as a brick? If you're worried about the gun's weight, you ain't a real man. Look, I get it. Every man likes the feeling of having something big and hard in his pants, but since you don't come by that naturally, you have to make up for it by carrying a 1911. For me personally, there just isn't enough room to carry such a massive handgun IWB next to my BWC. It just can't work. Whatever, dude. My pistol won 2 world wars. Since when has any pistol won any war? It's a backup, a secondary weapon. It's what you pull out in desperation after your rifle runs dry and you gotta make a final stand. Let's get something straight here. The First World War was won with mustard gas, belt-fed machine guns, and repeated violations of the 1907 Hague Convention. And the second was won with these.
He needs some milk!
Now guys, I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room. Jamming. Many people criticize the 1911 for its tendency to jam, specifically by way of the stovepipe. Personally, I have never encountered this issue, but based on my research, the most likely culprits are incompatible magazines and limp wristing. The mags are an easy fix. Only buy quality magazines designed specifically for that firearm. The limp wristing, on the other hand, well, that'll be harder to fix. With younger generations of men suffering from grip strength decline, and with grip strength naturally decreasing in older men as they age, and with all the gays everywhere, it's no wonder these 1911s are malfunctioning. In conclusion, the Colt Model 1911 is cool, in the same way that a 1908 Ford Model T is cool. It's a classic. It's bare bones. It's fun to admire and take it for a quick spin every now and then. It's a piece of history. But you wouldn't want to make the Model T your daily driver. And likewise, you wouldn't want to make the 1911 your daily carry. The 1911 definitely has its place, but that place is not your waistband. It belongs on the range. It belongs in competition. It belongs in a glass case or on the silver screen. But if you want my honest opinion,
That belongs in a museum.
They don't know that a 45 got a serious fucking jamming problem.